That jet is about to meet a wind your screens cannot see. The old man's voice was quiet, but it cut through Falcon Tower harder than an alarm. Captain Ryan Keller turned from the glowing weather display with one hand still resting on his headset. Outside the glass, Falcon Ridge Air Base shimmered under a white June sun. Heat rippled above runway 27. Range flags snapped west, fell limp, then snapped east again, as if the air itself could not decide which direction to tell the truth. On the main approach screen, a T-38 Talon trainer was descending with fuel low enough to make every voice in the tower careful. The instruments said the crosswind was inside limits. The tower sensors said visibility was clear. The digital approach model showed a safe glide path, clean numbers, and clean confidence. Captain Keller trusted clean confidence. At 29, he was one of the youngest instructor pilots on base, polished, sharp-eyed, and built from a world of glass cockpits, satellite weather, and color-coded certainty. Green meant good. Yellow meant caution. Red meant stop. Right now, almost everything was green. But Thomas Whitaker was not looking at the screens. He stood near the back wall in a faded navy flight jacket that had lost its shape years ago. His shoulders were slightly stooped. His white hair was combed back by habit, not vanity. His hands held a worn leather flight cap against his chest. The cap's brim was marked by a pale burn scar no one in the room had bothered to ask about. To the younger officers, he looked like a guest from the morning ceremony who had wandered into the wrong room. A piece of aviation history. A polite reminder of paper charts, analog dials, and men who once trusted clouds because the sky gave them no other choice. Thomas was watching the runway. A dust devil formed near the service road, leaned east, broke apart, then reappeared moving west along the ground. Near Hangar 4, a line of gulls lifted from the roof all at once and banked away from the approach path. A loose strip of caution tape snapped flat, dropped dead, then twisted backward against the wind reported on the screen. Keller glanced at him. Commander Whitaker. The approach system has the wind at 9 knots from the northwest. Tower sensors confirm it. The aircraft is stable. Thomas did not blink. Those sensors are reading air 20 feet too high. Lieutenant Emily Harper paused over her keyboard. She had been monitoring the T-38's descent, but something in the old man's voice made her look up. It was not panic. It was certainty without volume. Keller gave a thin smile, the kind pilots used when civilians commented on flying. With respect, Commander, we do not land aircraft by staring at flags anymore. A young officer near the communications rack almost laughed, then thought better of it. Thomas kept his eyes on the runway. That is not what I am staring at. In the headset, the T-38 pilot's voice came through tight but controlled. Falcon Tower, Talon 3-1, fuel state critical, established final. Keller leaned toward the microphone. Talon 3-1, winds within limits. Continue approach runway 27. Before he released the switch, Thomas stepped one pace forward. No, he said. If he stays on that line, he will lose lift over the left wing at 200 feet. The tower went still. Keller turned fully now. And you know that how? Thomas finally looked at him. His eyes were pale blue, weathered by age, and clear as a cold morning sky. Because the wind is rolling off that ridge, falling across the numbers, and curling back under him. Your screen is reading the sky, Captain. I am reading the runway. Commander Whitaker, Keller said, each word clipped clean, you are here as an honored guest, not as tower personnel. The phrase honored guest landed with the weight of a polite dismissal. Keller turned toward Emily without taking his eyes off Thomas. Confirm runway wind. Emily checked her console. Runway 27 sensor shows 9 knots from 310 degrees. Gust spread minimal. Upper field sensor shows 11 knots, same direction. Automated advisory still green. Keller nodded as if the machines had just testified under oath. Two independent readings. Both inside limits. Thomas pressed the leather cap a little tighter against his chest. They are both mounted above the roll. The bad air is lower. The young officer near the communications rack let out a short breath that almost became a laugh. Keller allowed himself a thin smile. Bad air. That is not exactly a recognized tower category. Thomas looked back through the glass. Dust moved in pale ribbons along the concrete, hugging the ground like smoke with no fire beneath it. It is recognized by the airplane. Keller stepped closer. Sir, I respect your service. But this tower manages active flight operations. We have a pilot on final with critical fuel. I cannot delay him because a retired officer does not like the way dust is moving. Thomas did not look away from the runway. Then do not delay him. Change his line. Based on what? Based on the ridge, the heat, the birds, the dust, and 50 years of knowing when wind is lying. Emily glanced toward the western ridge. For the first time, she noticed that the gulls had not returned to the hangar roof. They were circling low beyond the service road, avoiding the approach corridor entirely. In her headset, Talon 3-1 came through again. Falcon Tower, confirming final. Getting some light chop. Keller pressed the switch. Talon 3-1, continue. You are stable. Thomas took one more step forward. He is not stable. He just has not reached the part of the wind that knows it yet. Emily watched his reflection in the glass. His eyes moved from the ridge to the blast fence, from the service road to the threshold, from the gulls to the flags to the scrub grass bending in opposite directions only yards apart. Emily followed his gaze and felt a quiet unease open inside her. The screen said northwest. The ground said otherwise. Keller noticed her hesitation. Lieutenant Harper, keep your attention on the instruments. Yes, Captain. But her eyes flicked once more toward the runway. The young captain faced Thomas fully. Commander, every aircraft on this field operates under established procedure. We do not change final approach because of dust patterns, bird movement, or old instincts. Thomas looked at the runway numbers glowing white in the sun. That is why procedure has exceptions. Keller gave a soft laugh without humor. Exceptions are filed, reviewed, approved, and documented. They are not whispered from the back of the tower by a man who has not flown operational aircraft in decades. Talon 3-1, came the pilot's voice, tighter now, light chop increasing. Request confirmation on wind. Keller returned to the console. Talon 3-1, wind is 9 knots from 310 degrees. You are cleared to continue. Thomas closed his eyes for half a second. It was not defeat. It was listening. Tell him to stay 200 feet right of centerline until the threshold, then correct late. Keep the nose down 3 seconds longer than his training wants him to. Do not let him flare early. Keller turned slowly. You want me to give a student pilot an unapproved offset on final with emergency fuel? I want you to give him the air he actually has. On Emily's secondary monitor, a small maintenance drone feed blinked as it crossed near the far end of the runway. For one brief second, the image shuddered. The drone dipped, recovered, then drifted sideways against its own stabilizer correction before the feed returned to normal. Emily leaned closer. The data vanished into a routine refresh, but she had seen it. Thomas had not looked at the monitor. He had not needed to. His eyes were already fixed on the exact patch of air where the drone had stumbled. Keller saw Emily hesitate. Lieutenant, if you have a concern, state it using data. Emily opened her mouth, but the words caught. The confirmed data had already disappeared. All she had was 1 second of movement, one flicker of machine uncertainty, and Thomas Whitaker's impossible certainty pointing at the same patch of air. No confirmed anomaly, Captain. Keller nodded. There you have it. No confirmed anomaly. Thomas did not answer. His silence irritated Keller more than resistance would have. Keller stepped closer, lowering his voice but not enough to keep the room from hearing. "Commander Whitaker, I know the general wanted you to observe. I know this ceremony means something to people. But right now, you are interfering with an active recovery." The word interfering landed hard. Thomas held the leather cap a little tighter. The burned brim bent under his thumb. "I am trying to keep that pilot ahead of the airplane." Keller's eyes moved to the cap. "That pilot is ahead of the airplane because he has training, instruments, and a tower crew giving him approved guidance. Not because of an old hat and a memory." Emily looked up sharply. The communications officer stopped moving. Even the airman near the printer froze with a page half pulled from the tray. Thomas lowered his eyes to the cap. For the first time since entering the tower, something passed across his face. It was not anger. It was older than anger, quieter than pain, heavier than pride. Keller noticed it and mistook it for weakness. "With respect, sir, aviation has changed. We have predictive modeling, live weather feeds, flight computers, digital glide path tracking. We do not make decisions because a man remembers how the wind felt 50 years ago." Thomas ran one thumb along the burned edge of the cap. The tower glass, the consoles, the sunlit runway, and Keller's polished certainty faded at the edges of his mind. For a breath, he was not at Falcon Ridge. He was 31 years old over a black ocean, rain hammering the canopy so hard it sounded like gravel thrown against steel. The instrument panel glowed weak and uncertain. Static filled the radio. Somewhere beyond the storm, a carrier deck rolled under low clouds, and a young Air Force exchange pilot was out there with fuel bleeding away and no clean radar picture to follow. The weather report said the crosswind was steady. The smoke from the carrier stack said it was not. The rain moved one way. Sea spray moved another. The instruments showed a safe approach that would have led the young pilot into sinking air behind the island. Thomas remembered pressing the burned cap against his thigh after a cockpit electrical arc had scorched the brim earlier that week. He remembered ignoring a perfect number and trusting the tremor in his own aircraft, the pressure in the stick, the thin change in engine note as invisible air rolled over the deck. "Stay right," he had told the young pilot through static. "Nose down. Wait for my call. Do not flare until I give it to you." The voice had come back young and scared. "I do not see the deck." "I do," Thomas had answered, though he barely did. "Listen to me and fly the air you have, not the air you want." The young pilot landed hard, but alive. The cap kept its burned scar. Thomas kept the memory. The official report called it weather variation. Thomas never corrected the phrase. Men who came home did not always need the paperwork to know who had held the line. The memory vanished. The tower returned. Talon 3-1's voice came through again, strained but disciplined. "Falcon Tower, chop is getting stronger. Request landing clearance confirmation." Keller reached for the microphone. Thomas looked up from the cap, his eyes suddenly cold and clear. "Captain," he said, "the next 30 seconds will decide whether you trusted the right thing." Keller's hand stopped above the switch. "Talon 3-1, the pilot called, getting a sync on the left side." "Correcting." Emily's fingers tightened above her keyboard. "Sync on the left side." The exact words landed where Thomas had pointed minutes earlier. Keller heard it too. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. He pressed the switch. Talon 3-1, maintain glide path. Instruments show stable. Thomas stepped closer to the console. He is correcting into the roll. If he keeps chasing the needle, the wind will take the correction away from him at the threshold. Keller turned on him. "You do not know what his aircraft is doing." Thomas looked through the glass. "I know what the air is doing to it." The western ridge shimmered. Out beyond the service road, dust flattened suddenly, not rising, not swirling, but pressing low as if an invisible hand had pushed it against the earth. Thomas saw the pattern complete itself. Falling air off the ridge. Heat rising from the concrete. A curl forming low across the numbers. A clean trap, invisible to any sensor mounted too high to feel it. Tell him right of centerline, Thomas said. 200 feet. Nose down. Wait for the curl to pass. Keller exhaled sharply. That is not approved language. Then say it in approved language. Emily's secondary monitor blinked again. The maintenance drone, parked low near the far taxiway, sent a short telemetry burst before the feed corrected. Vertical disturbance. Lateral drift. Automatic compensation exceeded for 0.8 seconds. It was not enough for a formal wind shear warning. It was enough for her stomach to drop. Captain, she said carefully, drone telemetry just recorded lateral drift near the far threshold. Keller snapped his eyes toward her. How strong? Brief. Less than 1 second. Then it is noise. Thomas did not look away from the window. Noise is what machines call a warning they do not understand. That sentence changed the room. Talon 3-1 called again, and this time the calm was nearly gone from his voice. Falcon Tower, I am fighting uncommanded drift. Fuel is emergency minimum. I need this landing. The word emergency stripped pride down to bone. For the first time, Keller did not answer immediately. Thomas leaned toward him, not threatening, not pleading, only certain. Captain, that boy does not need your confidence. He needs the truth. Keller looked at the wind readout. 9 knots. Northwest. Green. He looked out at the runway. Dust sliding backward. Birds gone. Flags arguing with one another. He looked at Thomas Whitaker, and for the first time since the old man entered the tower, he did not see a ceremonial guest. He saw a pilot listening to the sky. But pride is a heavy thing when a room has watched you carry it. Keller reached for the microphone again. Talon 3-1, continue standard approach. Emily's hand moved before fear could stop it. She opened the emergency coordination channel to Major General Prescott's office and spoke low, meant only for the line. Sir, this is Lieutenant Harper in Falcon Tower. There is an old Navy commander here named Whitaker. He says the wind is lying, and I think he is right. In Emily's earpiece, a voice answered. It was not an aide. It was Major General Alan Prescott. Lieutenant Harper, repeat that name. Emily swallowed. Thomas Whitaker, sir. Retired Navy commander. Late 70s. Faded Navy flight jacket. He is in the tower right now. For half a second, the line carried only breath. Then Prescott's voice changed. Do not let Captain Keller ignore him. Emily's eyes widened. Sir. Put me on tower speaker. Now. Emily tapped the console. The command speaker opened with a soft tone just as Talon 3-1 called again. Falcon Tower, correction is getting heavy. I am right of glide but still being pushed left. Keller leaned toward the microphone. Talon 3-1, reduce correction and recenter. Thomas spoke at the same time. No. Let him stay right. Keller snapped around. Commander, step back. Before Thomas could answer, the command speaker cracked to life. Captain Keller, this is Major General Prescott. Every spine in the room straightened. Keller's face changed instantly. General, sir. You will place Commander Whitaker on advisory input immediately. The word struck the tower like a hard door closing. Keller stared at the speaker, then at Emily, then at Thomas. Sir, with respect, I have an aircraft on final and no validated wind shear warning. Prescott's reply came sharp and controlled. Captain, I did not ask whether your system validated him. I asked whether Thomas Whitaker is in your tower. Keller's jaw tightened. He is, sir. Then listen to him. No one moved. Outside, the T-38 dropped through 500 feet, wings rocking gently in air that still looked empty to everyone except the old man. Thomas stepped toward the glass until his reflection aligned with the aircraft in the distance. The years seemed to fall away from his posture. His shoulders settled. His chin lifted. His voice lost the dust of age and became the voice of a pilot who had spoken through storms, static, and nights when a runway was only a promise. Tell him 200 feet right of centerline, Thomas said. Hold a shallow descent. Keep the nose down through the first bump. Do not flare until I say. Keller looked as though he had been asked to hand over the sky itself. But Prescott remained silent on the speaker. That silence was an order. Keller pressed the transmit switch, his words stiff. Talon 3-1, Falcon Tower. Adjust 200 feet right of centerline. Maintain shallow descent. Stand by for flare call. Falcon Tower, moving right. Standing by. Thomas. Watch the aircraft slide off the perfect digital line. On the screen, the deviation turned yellow. A caution tone sounded. Keller flinched toward it, but Prescott's voice cut through. Captain, silence that tone. Emily muted it. Thomas lifted one hand, palm down, feeling nothing physical, reading everything. Dust on the threshold flattened. A flag dropped. Heat shimmer folded sideways. There, he whispered. That is the first roll. The T-38 dipped slightly, then steadied. Keller's eyes widened despite himself. The screen had not predicted it. The old man had. The T-38 held its offset line, no longer centered on the perfect digital path. To every computer in the tower, the aircraft was slightly wrong. To Thomas Whitaker, it was finally where the air would allow it to live. 400 feet, Emily said. Outside, the jet grew larger against the white glare, gear down, wings making tiny corrections that only trained eyes could read. Thomas kept his palm low. Tell him not to chase it. Keller hesitated. Major General Prescott's voice came through the speaker again, colder now. Captain, repeat his advisory. Keller swallowed. Talon 3-1, do not chase minor drift. Hold present correction. Maintain shallow descent. Holding present correction, the pilot answered. Thomas watched the far threshold. The dust was moving in two layers now. The lower layer slid east like water poured across the concrete. Above it, heat shimmer bent west, soft and uneven. Two winds occupying the same space. One visible only in fragments. Both waiting to confuse a young pilot trained to believe the air was a single thing. Second roll in 5 seconds, Thomas said. No one breathed. Keller looked at the wind readout. Still green. Then the T-38 gave a small, unmistakable wing rock. Emily stared at Thomas with open disbelief. The screen updated half a second later, too late to warn anyone. On the command speaker, Prescott exhaled slowly. That is him. That is how he brought me home. Keller looked at the speaker. Sir. Prescott's voice lowered, carrying memory under the rank. I was 24 years old the first time I heard Commander Whitaker talk a pilot through blind. Weather. We had no clean radar, no useful feed, no comfortable answer. He read wind off smoke, rain, engine sound, and the way a wing trembled before instruments caught up. There are men who operate aircraft, Captain. Then there are men who understand the sky before it explains itself. The tower stayed silent. The words changed Thomas without him moving. The faded jacket was no longer a costume from a ceremony. The burned cap was no longer an old object in tired hands. 300 feet, Emily said. Talon 3-1 came over the radio. Falcon Tower, aircraft feels steadier right of centerline. Awaiting flare call. Thomas leaned closer to the glass. The runway numbers rushed toward the approaching jet. The worst air had not passed yet. He could see it forming near the threshold, invisible to screens, written in dust, heat, and silence. Not yet, he said. Keller pressed the switch without argument. Talon 3-1, do not flare. Continue. Stand by. Standing by. The T-38 crossed into the runway environment at 300 feet. 250 feet, Emily said. Thomas raised 2 fingers, then lowered one slowly. Tell him to keep the nose down. Let the first lift pass under him. Keller repeated it. Talon 3-1, keep the nose down. Let the first lift pass. Do not flare. Keeping nose down. The system disliked the correction. The runway did not. Dust ahead of the threshold suddenly rose in a thin pale sheet, not upward, but sideways, whipping across the concrete and folding back on itself. A flag near the arresting gear snapped flat, dropped, then snapped the opposite direction so quickly that Emily took a half step back. Keller saw it. Everyone saw it. The wind had finally shown itself, but only after Thomas had already guided the aircraft around its teeth. There is the curl, Thomas said. Hold him. Hold him. The T-38 rocked once, a short roll that made the room tighten. The pilot's voice broke through with disciplined strain. Falcon Tower, I felt that. Thomas leaned forward. Tell him good. Tell him he is through the first one. Keller transmitted instantly. Talon 3-1, good correction. You are through the first roll. Continue. Holding. A new sound rose behind them. Heavy steps on the tower stairs. Major General Alan Prescott entered in his service uniform from the ceremony, ribbons sharp, silver hair neatly combed, face set with the focus that made junior officers straighten without being told. But he did not look at Keller first. He looked at Thomas Whitaker. For a second, the general was not a general. He was a younger man remembering a voice-over static, a black sky, and a runway he had not believed he would see. Tom, Prescott said softly. Thomas did not look away from the aircraft. Later, Alan. The use of the general's first name moved through the room like thunder without sound. Keller's face went still. Prescott accepted it without the slightest trace of offense. He stepped beside Keller and watched the jet descend. Do exactly what he says, Prescott ordered. No one questioned it now. 150 feet, Emily called. Thomas lifted his hand again. Second sink is coming off the concrete. It will try to make him flare early. Do not let him. Keller's voice was steady now because it belonged to the old man's instruction. Talon 3-1, expect second sink. Do not flare early. Hold your nose. Stand by. The jet crossed the threshold slightly right of centerline, low but controlled. For one long breath, it seemed to hang between what the screens had promised and what the wind had hidden. Thomas watched the dust flatten, watched the shimmer bend, watched the wings settle into cleaner air. Then his hand dropped. Now, he said. Flare. Keller pressed the switch. Talon 3-1, flare now. The young pilot obeyed. The T-38 lifted its nose with careful restraint, not too soon, not too much, just enough to meet the runway instead of the lie above it. For a breathless second, the aircraft seemed to float on the thin edge between noise and silence. Then the main wheels touched the concrete with a firm, clean chirp. A brief puff of rubber smoke trailed behind them like a signature written in gray. The nose wheel settled. The jet stayed straight. It rolled past the runway numbers, past the place where the hidden curl had waited, past the wind that had almost fooled every screen in Falcon Tower. Emily covered her mouth with one hand, not in fear now, but in release. Someone near the communications rack whispered, "He is down." In the headset, the young pilot's voice came through, shaky with relief but still professional. Falcon Tower, Talon 3-1 is safe on rollout. Thank you. Keller looked at Thomas Whitaker. For the first time all morning, he did not see age first. He saw discipline. He saw memory. He saw a man who had been reading the air while everyone else had been reading permission to ignore it. Prescott moved to Thomas's side. You still hear it. Thomas lowered the burned flight cap from his chest. The wind has not changed much. Only the people listening to it. The words settled over the tower with more weight than any reprimand could have carried. Keller removed his headset slowly. He looked at the green wind display still showing 9 knots from the northwest, clean and confident and incomplete. Then he looked toward the runway, where Talon 3-1 was turning safely onto the taxiway under escort. Keller stepped away from his station and faced the old veteran. Commander Whitaker, he said, his voice stripped of its earlier polish, I was wrong. Thomas studied him. There was no victory in his eyes, no hunger to humiliate the man who had doubted him. You trusted what you were trained to trust, Thomas said. Next time, train yourself to notice what the screen is not telling you. Keller nodded. The gesture was small, and because it was small, it felt honest. I also disrespected you, Keller said. That was mine. Not the pressure. Not the fuel state. Mine. Thomas looked at the burned cap in his hands. Respect is easy when a man has a uniform and a title. It matters more when he looks like history standing in the back of the room. Keller swallowed. Yes, sir. Prescott turned to the room. Every officer, every airman, every technician in Falcon Tower had gone still. Then the general faced Thomas fully, brought his heels together, and raised his right hand in a slow, perfect salute. No one had ordered it. But one by one, the room followed. Emily Harper stood first. Then the communications officer. Then the airman at the printer. Captain Keller saluted last, and held it the longest. Thomas stood in the center of that silence with the old cap in his hand, the faded wings over his heart catching the afternoon light. Outside, the desert wind moved across Falcon Ridge again, soft now, almost gentle, passing over the runway it had tried to hide. Thomas returned the salute, not sharply, not for show, but with the quiet precision of a man who remembered every sky that had ever asked him to listen. Talon 3-1's pilot, still pale from the landing, asked permission to attend in his flight suit. When he entered the hangar, he found Thomas standing near the back again, away from microphones and away from applause. The young pilot approached him and held out a small kneeboard card. His hand shook just enough to show what he had survived. Sir, the pilot said, they told me you made the call. Thomas looked at the card. It showed the approach profile and a handwritten note in black marker. Right of center line. Nose down. Wait. Thomas did not take it at first. The pilot's voice lowered. I would like you to sign it. The old commander looked uncomfortable, almost tired from the honor. I did not land your airplane, Thomas said. No, sir, the pilot answered. But you gave me the air I actually had. For a moment, Thomas said nothing. Then he took the pen and wrote his name in small, careful letters. Thomas Whitaker. Beneath it, after a pause, he added 3 words. Listen lower first. Later that afternoon, Major General Prescott ordered the tower recording preserved in the base training archive. Not as a heroic story. Not as a speech. As a lesson. The file was entered under a title no software system would have created by itself. Whitaker Wind. Below the title, Emily Harper added a short note for future tower crews. The sensors were correct for the air they measured. Commander Whitaker was correct for the air that mattered. Thomas never asked for a plaque. He never posed for a photograph. He left Falcon Ridge before the public affairs officer could find him. But months later, Emily stood in front of a new class of controllers and played the audio from that morning. They heard Keller's clean numbers. They heard the young pilot's strained voice. They heard the caution tone. Then they heard Thomas Whitaker say, calm and certain, "Your screen is reading the sky. I am reading the runway." Emily paused the recording there. She looked at the young officers in front of her, all bright, all trained, all ready to trust the screens that made them feel safe. "Remember this," she said. "Technology can measure a lot. But humility is what tells you when the measurement is not enough." Outside, a flag shifted in the desert wind. Once to the west. Once to the east. Then still. Some instruments measure the weather. Some men remember what it costs not to.